This is the Hagmann and Hagmann Report for today. It is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann, the senior host of Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Usually, along with my son Joe Hagmann, together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, except for when we're not. Joe is out again this evening. He won't be joining us tonight. I do have good news, however. He will be back with us tomorrow. His wife underwent surgery today, and everything worked out very well. She's recovering. Thank you for your prayers. Joe wanted me to make sure that I thanked everyone for their prayers of support and concern. Joe will be back. I do expect him back tomorrow night. Now, on tap for tonight is the closing, connecting all of the dots summary of what we've been talking about over the past two nights. And over the past couple of nights, taking advantage of the situation with Joe not being here, a lot of emails, decided to kind of do a connect the dots, blow by blow background history of how we got to where we are today, and identifying things like the power behind the power, the Illuminati, because we throw these phrases, these descriptive terms around freely, and there's a lot of times, and I see this from certain emails that I do receive. There are a lot of times that we really don't know, or people don't know what we're talking about, and we have to remember that we're all not up to speed. We're all not on the same page. We're not all using the same textbook, and we're not getting our information from the same places, which is a good thing, except when we're at different levels in discussing this world domination that's taking place. And we're seeing it really play out today, even today. One of the big headlines was about Saudi Arabia today, terminating their relationship with the United States. If you'll recall, folks, in fact, one of my good friends connected to the intelligence world had told me to expect the unexpected, and I believe that was the title of an article recently written and published at our home base, HomelandSecurityUS.com, and also published as well at CanadaFreePress.com. Expect the unexpected. This is an asymmetrical war that we're fighting, in which we are involved. And of course, alliances change, things do happen, at least on the surface. You know, it's interesting because we have talked, and I've mentioned this before. You've got to ask yourself in intellectual discussion, if Obama is the front man for a power structure in an invisible shadow type government, and part of that shadow government includes the Saudis, which the Saudis, folks, are a CIA. Well, the royal family is really a creation of the CIA and its earlier counterpart. Well, now today, you've got Prince Bandar saying, last week actually, saying, well, we're not so sure because of Obama's stance on Iran and also his apparent unwillingness to go forward in Syria to oust Assad. And we'd like to take a little bit of credit for that. Us in the new media would like to take a little bit of credit for that, throwing the monkey wrench into the gears, putting the fly in the ointment a little bit by exposing the true nature of what was behind Benghazi. This is all part of the larger picture. So, to that extent, when I had written expect the unexpected, those were the words of a gentleman that really gave me all of the information, or 95% of the information about what really took place in Benghazi. And did we see this coming? Well, not with absolute certainty. but you could see the cloud of misinformation and disinformation, and in this case, the summer and fall of discontent because of the unwillingness to continue on to topple Assad because of the exposure that Benghazi produced. So things are happening. We are making a difference, I believe, through exposing the lies in the agenda of the people behind the power. And remember, I've often said, and again, this is compliments of my friend, that the United States is a captured operation, but captured for whom or by whom? Saudi Arabia for certain. And then, of course, we have to look behind. Who's behind Saudi Arabia? But in this case, Saudi Arabia for certain. So my question to you, ladies and gentlemen, and I think this is an important aspect to take a look at, are we seeing now, as we approach the 50th anniversary of the assassination of JFK, are we seeing now a similar situation perhaps developing, the storm clouds forming, and perhaps are we seeing a situation where Obama, Barry Soetoro, who, in my view, based on my research, was a creation of the CIA, was a creation of the communist/progressive front that is controlled by the Illuminati. If you look back in his history, and books have been written about Obama, many books from bloggers saying, well, he's a Muslim, and the emphasis is on that Islamic component. Well, that's fine. But what they're failing to do, in my view at least, is step back. Take a look at it base. If you want to see the big picture, the big landscape, look at the big picture. And to do that, you've got to step away from the wall and look at the panoramic view of the portrait or the photograph or the picture hanging on the wall. Look at all of it. And in fact, don't even just look at the picture. Look at the wall it's hanging on. Look at the complete environment. And I think we'll see, once again, that Obama was groomed. He was created. And he might not even realize it from a very young age to be in the position he's in. You know, when you dance with the devil, there are dues to be paid. You got to pay the orchestra. And isn't it interesting? We have seen throughout his life not only this CIA connection, perhaps this origin genesis of Obama, but we've seen Saudi involvement just about at every turn. You've seen the Saudis pay for his education, Saudi friends pay for his education, and the alliances, personal and professional, when he was a community organizer, or even a young man, actually, and then a community organizer, and then a junior senator from Illinois, and then, of course, what happened in the 2008 election when he ran out of campaign funds. Well, where did that money come from? Well, it came from numerous unidentified, supposedly unidentified, small contributors, numbers of them. But if you start to dissect where that money came from, if you start to take a closer look at who funded Obama in 2008 when he was cash poor, you'll see, I believe you'll see that the mosques, the masjids, the Islamic schools all across America were given credit cards by the Saudis, and they in turn used those cards in the internet to make the minimal donations, limited donations to the campaign. It's a lot easier to have 1,000 Islamic centers donate $300 than one donate, $3 million. It's just that way. It's a lot easier. And of course, where did this money come from? It came from the Saudis, the Saudi Arabia. So, is there a debt that is owed, or at least a debt that's perceived on behalf, or by the Saudis? Of course, there is. And now, do the Saudis perhaps feel like they were double-crossed? I think that's a good bet. And what does that do then? Where does that leave Obama? That, in my view, in the larger sense, in the larger picture, one must ask the question, has Obama lost his usefulness, his utility, his purpose, the purpose for which he was placed in his position? Again, this is intellectual discussion. This is not anything more or less than that. But we're watching historic events evolve. And don't forget, when we're talking about the Illuminati, we're talking about the powers behind the powers. We're talking about this agenda, this Luciferian satanic agenda. The end result here is to destroy the United States from within. No military is going to do it. It's going to happen from within. So what better way to destroy us from within than have a plant, a legend, a Manchurian candidate even? Could he be? It's possible. There are so many unanswered questions with respect to Barack Hussein Obama, a.k.a. Barry Soetoro. But with this news, don't underestimate the headlines of today that suggest this rift between Saudi Arabia and specifically Obama, or Saudi Arabia and the United States. Do not underestimate this. This all has to do with the culmination, the completion, the necessary completion of a plan, and that plan is to create this Islamic caliphate in that area for the purpose, for the ultimate purpose. Now, some people just stop right there and say, well, it's a Muslim thing. Well, it's not. It's a softening of the area. It's the realignment of power. And, of course, with this realignment of power, it is the next step toward a global governance. In all of this, what we're seeing is the movement toward a single global governance. And with that comes global religion, a single religion, it's a state religion, and of course a one world economic system. And if you look at the markets and you look at America's economy, we can see that all vehicles that are in play here are driving toward, they're on the same path, same roads, same interstates toward that same destination of a single global government. In talking with my friend who's, again, very connected in the intelligence world, he said the problem today is people are not thinking big enough. And it took me a long time to really understand that. But this is part of it. People are not thinking big enough. And until you begin to think big enough, until we start to look and realize, no, it's not Republicans and Democrats. And I'm sure most of all of us have that and understand that. No, it's not just simply the Saudis, the Saudi agenda. No, it's not that either. It's not limited to that. And it's not the Muslims versus the Christians. It's not that. It is all of that, but it's not just that. And so many people, and I would throw myself right directly into this pile, this description. So many people have this tunnel vision, and they stick to it. And they say, well, this is how it is. Until you begin to poke at the bear and to see the bigger picture here. And that brings us to these 3 shows, with tonight closing the shows out. That is to connect the dots, to see that we are at the beginning or the end of the beginning, and the beginning was put in motion hundreds of years ago. The plans, the architecture was laid at the dawn of man with Adam and Eve, and you've got to understand that this is an agenda of good versus evil, and God versus Satan, or Satan challenging God and using man, attempting to deceive us. This is all part of it. So we've got to look at the larger scope. We just can't limit ourselves. So, and I'll even say this. You know, people oftentimes will ask me, well, why do you talk about fallen angels? Why do you talk about the Nephilim? Why do you talk about, with Nathan Leal, for example, certain aspects, or Doc Marquis? Why do you have these people on? Because it certainly doesn't seem to fit your news and information and analysis. At least a lot of times it doesn't fit that description. Well, yes, it does, because these are all components. And I was reminded last night, following the show during a telephone conversation, I was reminded last night that a lot of people, they've got like one arm of the octopus. They're touching it, and they feel like they've got the entire solution, or they got it figured out. No. Another person's got another arm of the octopus without realizing that there are 7, or 8 arms in total to this beast. There are just more than one. So we've got to look at the entire, we've got to recognize that what we're looking at here is like an octopus or the beast. We're fighting a fight for our souls. We're fighting a fight that's rife with deception. Deception on all sides. We're fighting a fight that we can't just say, well, I align myself with the Christian conservative base, because there's deception and misdirection there as well. Or we can't just say, I align myself with, pick a group or pick an organization. You've got to think for yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, because this is a fight for our eternal salvation. And as I preface this show tonight, I often say that, we were put here, you and me and everyone listening to this broadcast. It's my contention, it's my belief, and I would believe this, I believe this more today than I ever have, that you and I were put here for a specific purpose. Now, we might not know with absolute specificity what that purpose is, but I do feel that at some point we will, if we ask, if we focus on what the true nature of the battle is. And the true nature of the battle is good versus evil. It's interesting because the name of the show tonight could be The Vacuum Ahead. Who is going to fill the vacuum that will be created when the United States collapses? Because the United States is, in practicality, a speed bump in the road to the establishment of a single global governance. And out of that single global governance will arise the Antichrist. So, is it important to be looking? Yeah, I'd say it's extremely important to be looking. We better be looking in all areas. We better understand that we might have a hold of one arm of an octopus, but we don't have, in many cases, we don't see the entire octopus. And folks, that's by design. And we also better understand that we've been lied to, and lied to so many times, so frequently, and the lie is so big that oftentimes we're not able to recognize it. We look at the lie, we're living a lie, and it's normal to us. Just one example. Christians are told, or Christians celebrate Christmas on December 25th. Why? Because that's when we believe, or we're told, that that's Christ's birthday. But if you do an extensive, intensive study of when Christ was born, and if in fact the purpose is to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, well, and you do the extensive study, and you find out that it's not December 25th, and never was, but it was a date in September 2 BC. And then you find out that Christmas, December 25th, our Christmas, is actually a pagan celebration, celebrating the Luciferian Illuminous God, their God, not ours. You realize that you've been living a lie. And your parents have lived a lie, in most cases. It's pretty unsettling. And you know what's even more unsettling, and I believe a case can be made based on research, and we could do one program by ourselves on this. I believe a case can be made for the birth of Jesus Christ being not just in September, but September 11th, 2 BC. And if that's the case, now think about this. If that's the case, that puts 9/11, 2001 in an entirely different category altogether, doesn't it? Of course it does. Just want to say this, ladies and gentlemen. I talked to Steve Quayle today as well. Just kind of some housekeeping before we get into the program. Tomorrow night, Steve Quayle and V, the guerrilla economist, will be on together on Hagmann and Hagmann talking about the state of the economy. And we were batting around different potential titles with glee, I should add. When I say glee, I'm talking about we're just kind of being funny, but Steve said, hey, how's this for a title? Robin and his DC hoods, and the sheriff of Slaughterham. The buzzards are ready to pick your bones. And, of course, that's a reference to, that's a play on the words, of course, but tomorrow night, Steve Quayle and V for the entire program talking about the state of our economy, exactly what is taking place. And this, by the way, does fit in to, and it's a natural progression of our programs over the last 3 days. It is a natural progression into the larger picture, because behind the curtain is this intricate economic machine that contains a big red reset button. And then you've got this little puny Luciferian midget-like man about ready to push that button, that red button that's going to take the entire U.S. system, economic system down. Does that mean it's the end of the world? No. Will it be the end of the world as we know it? Yes. The significance of an economic catastrophic economic event cannot be understated, not just for the United States. And if you're listening to this, and I know we've got listeners, I want to say hello to those listening to this program in Ecuador. Thank you. Listeners I'm going to say hello to Karen in Rome. Thank you, Karen. I'll be responding back to your emails here shortly. And others all across the world. Everybody is going to be affected. So just keep that in mind. But tomorrow, Steve Quayle and V. And then on Friday, we're going to have Nathan Leal back on. It's kind of an exclamation point onto what we've been talking about over the last, 3 days now. So I think it's going to be it's been a fabulous week, folks. And I want to thank you for all of your emails, the emails I've received. I just want to, before we get into the meat and potatoes of tonight's program, just want to touch base here with a couple of emails that I got. And I want to thank you very much. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, our home base, if you're new to the program, and I know that we have a lot of new listeners, our home base is HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com. Of course, you can find my articles also published at CanadaFreePress.com. And in terms of our program, we are simulcast on the Christians United Broadcasting Network, the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Spell it all out, the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. There is clear streaming audio. But before we get into the meat and potatoes, I just want to say I got an email from BNCJ. BNC, I want to thank you. BNC writes regarding the New World Order agenda. Thank you. Nice job. Another email received. I want to thank Mike K. He writes this: 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices, 13 colonies started America. Significance or significant? MK. And, of course, we had talked about the symbolism of numerology yesterday, and I would like to remind people it's not what we believe. It's not that we believe that, you and I believe numbers have certain meaning. It's what they believe. It's what the enemy believes. And then this from Chad, more about the numbers. Chad E., thank you very much. And he says this, he writes this: Doug, I listened on podcast and I was hearing you speak again about the 19.5 number. Besides the things that you listed previously, there are also some interesting things, and he did find some interesting things. Remember, folks, we had talked about this, the 19.5 million fake Twitter followers for Obama. Well, he found some other numbers that are of significance, perhaps. 19.5 million iPads sold by Apple. Apple, as of 4/23/13. 19.5% rise in auto sales in China as of 5/11/13. And then 19.5 tons of gold added to the Russian reserve. And then Chad points out that the pyramid structures and the face that resembles the Sphinx is at the 19.5 degree latitude on Mars. And listeners, and also Chad, you'll find that the 19.5 figures prominently in the pyramids in Giza. And there's just so much to do with these various numbers. And a lot of the numbers, and we talked about this yesterday, Masonic, the Freemasonry, Masonic significance of these numbers. But by the way, just 4 days before the Cyprus Bank shut down the bail-in, it's interesting, the electricity authority there withdrew 19.5 million euro from the banking system. Now you've got to wonder, why not 20? Why not 19 million pounds? Why 19.5? And the questions that arise from these, are we seeing some sort of coded messages being sent forth back and forth? That you and I, the unwashed masses, the people who aren't part of this big club, aren't privy to the meaning? I dare say that's exactly what's happening. And the vote, when Diana Reedy had that exchange with that gray-haired gentleman in the House, the vote was 195. When she began when she had that interaction with that gray-haired gentleman at the right before she went up and began to walk up to the dais, to the microphone. Is that coincidence? I think so. I want to say hi to Larry. Larry, thank you so very much, my friend, giving me a hand in the interactive chat. God bless you. You know how bad I am at things in terms of trying to do two things at once. Thank you for being there, my friend, my brother. Appreciate it. And this, of course, lastly, from Chet. Chet had really sent some information here to me. I'm going to get into it in a little bit here, but he talks about the Committee of 300, and the information that he found about the Committee of 300 changed his worldview. What he has done and what he did for me on this is he had taken the best excerpts from a specific book and compiled them into a short document. And that he prints. Actually, he actually prints these out and hands these out to people to shock them out of their comfort zones. The document, he attached it to the email, and he references that, I read some good excerpts. He said, you read some good excerpts from the Committee of 300 on the air, but you haven't read the best from the book about the Committee of 300. And he provided what I believe were some very extremely, in fact, I had come across these today, and so we're thinking alike there, Chat, and I want to thank you so much for these excerpts. We're going to be getting into the Committee of 300 momentarily. Other topics. What we're going to do again tonight is to tie everything together, and in doing so, identifying where we're at, apparently in the timeline, who is currently involved. But before that, we're going to do a short recap for the rest of this hour. And in addition to the short recap, I want to address one particular incident that you might have heard about. Now, I know, Kim, I know you heard about this because I know you listened to this, I believe. And others might have heard about this. But I want to address this. It's going to shake your worldview, I believe, shake your worldview, and forever change the way you think about events and about history. Before I get into that, I'm going to take a short break. You're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 23rd day of October 2013. We'll be right back after this brief message. Doug Hagmann back with you again, flying solo tonight, this 23rd day of October 2013. That, of course, was Zygmunt Brzezinski, whose daughter, of course, works as a reporter, anchorette at MSNBC. And you've got to wonder, given those words, that language, that phrase, that sentiment, you've got to wonder, is he human? Does he care about you and I to talk like that? Of course not. One more email I want to give a nod to Jeremiah. Thank you, Jeremiah. With regard to the Diane Reedy situation, a couple of brief thoughts referring to numerology and the occult in Diane Reedy. First of all, her husband had noticed that she got up at 3 a.m. to pray and read. 3 a.m. being a key number, 3 being a key number. Again, you look at it and you say, well, maybe it wasn't 3, but let's just say it was, because it was used. When are we most suggestible? And this will address those people whose emails I've received about the potential mind control aspects of things. As we talked about the Naval Yard shooter and engraving in his gun a message about being tormented by voices, and what is it possible that he took his gun and went to neutralize the voices that were tormenting him? And think back to movies that once again, the permeation of the Illuminati into Hollywood is so great. Think back, and even back into the early 60s, think back to 1962, the original Manchurian Candidate. And then superimpose that thought, if you haven't seen it, the original one at least, it's definitely worth your time to rent or get it. I think it's off Amazon Prime. You could probably watch it for free or get it for 99 cents. But it's definitely worth the time spent, so you can see what Hollywood was like even back in the early 60s. What perhaps there was a message there. But again, 3 a.m. to pray and read. And that hour, that middle of the night, is when people are most suggestible. And then Jeremiah writes again, number 2, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And he notes that prime numbers or elite cannot be divided. And of course, he makes reference to the votes on screen, 195, 19.5, and then writes with a question: was this a message to other elites to perhaps come together? Was this some sort of a signal? Was there something with a man with a gray hair? Could this also be mind control? Jeremiah, that's thinking out of the box. And you know, at this point, we could either go with what we know as the normal party line or the normal method of thinking, and keep ourselves into this box, this mental box, or we can expand our mind a little bit and to question everything. Now, I'm not talking about questioning Jesus Christ. I'm not talking about questioning your faith. I'm talking about questioning man's actions. Are we being led? Are we being played? Oh, we're certainly being played. But to what extent are we being played? It's an important thing. Something that I have been researching. In fact, I was talking with my intelligence source on this as well before I get into tying things together. Folks, we all know the story of the Titanic, don't we? The night of April 14th, well, actually the 15th, is when she sank in the icy waters. We all know the story of the Atlantic. In fact, there have been 6 movies made about the sinking of the Titanic. The most recent, of course, and the most popular, I believe second only to, or perhaps even surpassing, the movie Avatar, was by James Cameron, the Hollywood producer, in, I think it was 1998. And just kind of an aside on James Cameron, the more I got to investigate his reputation in Hollywood, the more I began to look at James Cameron, the more I started thinking, with the computer-generated graphics and all of the possibilities, might we as a people be subjected to mind control. Well, we know we're being subjected to suggestive mind control through Hollywood. We know that's part of their agenda. We know that that's taking place. But I found that the allegations of James Cameron, actors and actresses not wanting to work with him as a director, not because of his attention necessarily to detail, not because of his intense love and passion for his craft. Well, maybe craft is the wrong word, or perhaps even the right word. But no, he's not the man that you see on television in the interviews, according to some indications here. He could very well be working with those who will be a part of, or perhaps creating a scenario of intense deception. And where would that deception be? Well, that deception could very well speak to this alien invasion. We've all been hearing about this, even in rational circles. Are we not being prepared to think that maybe that aliens could come to Earth and suddenly declare themselves our cousins, and in fact, our distant cousins, and explain away the life of Jesus Christ and our origins, and even bring with them scientific proof? Could not Hollywood be part of this great deception? And how many people, given, I mean, look, we had Tupac Shakur, I think, and I could be wrong on the name, but this holographic image of him on stage, post-mortem, of course, but yet alive to the audience. So think of what can be done in the future, and we'll think of what can be done right now, with the understanding that we only know what we know right now, but the military, the computer type of graphics, the simulations, the various things, folks, those are decades, if not a half a century, well in advance of what we're aware of today. So we've got to think bigger, because the lie will be big. The deception will be big. When you read in the Bible that even the very elect will be deceived, you've got to know whatever is coming and whatever we're going to be facing, it's going to be pretty convincing. But this brought me to a project here, and to shake your understanding of history. If you go back to the time period, we had spoken about this yesterday, about the establishment of the Federal Reserve, and of course the Masonic Luciferian agenda of 3 world wars, and of course World War I, the first war fought between kings by proxies, and the death and destruction that it caused. Well, in the run-up, and during that time, we had one of the most tragic accidents as you and I would know, and that was the sinking of the Titanic. Now, you might think that, boy, this guy has lost his marbles if he's going to suggest that the Titanic is anything other than what it was. But, folks, let me just say this. The events leading up to the Titanic were extremely important to the events of the day. When we think of the events that have transpired in history over the last 100 years to 200 years, certain events really stand out as ones of great horror, great surprise, great sadness, and, of course, 9/11 comes into play. And in its time, so does the sinking of the Titanic. If we look at the Titanic, I would suggest to you, and folks, you can do your own research on this, but be careful when you do, because you've got to not only check your sources, but understand that some sources have agendas and some just report the facts. There are certain indications that just be careful when you do research. Remember, 2 years before the sinking of the Titanic, in 1910, the 7 guys that met on Jekyll Island, just off of the Georgia coast, and of course they created what is now the Federal Reserve. The men were Nelson Aldrich, Frank Vanderlip. They were representative of the Rockefeller financial empire. Then you had Henry Davidson, Charles Norton. And you can find this online, or better yet, you can actually find this in a book by G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island. But he doesn't get into what I'm about to get into. Benjamin Strong, representing J.P. Morgan. Paul Warburg, representing the Rothschild banking dynasty of Europe. We already saw, and we've already established, that the Rothschilds were the banking agents for the Vatican, and continue to be, holding the keys to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, none of what I'm saying here is an indictment or a defamation of Catholics. What I'm talking about the smoke of Satan seeping underneath the doors and into the highest levels of various organizations, agencies, including the Vatican. So do not mistake what I'm saying as an indictment against Catholicism. But anyway, do you know who was the owner of the White Star Lines, which owned, of course, the Titanic and other ships as well? J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan took control of White Star Lines, and that was his baby. The Morgans were friendly competitors at the time with the Rothschilds and became socially close to them. Morgan's London-based firm was actually saved from financial ruin in 1857 by the Bank of England, over which the Rothschilds had very great influence. So there was this camaraderie, this big elite financial and social club back then. But Morgan, J.P. Morgan, from which we now have J.P. Morgan Chase, and once again, we've got to understand the history. They've served as a Rothschild financial agent, yet went to great lengths to appear very American. Now, the Rockefellers' entry into this whole arrangement was not really welcomed by Morgan. They became competitors eventually. They decided, however, to minimize their competition by entering into joint ventures. In the end, they worked together to create this National Federal Reserve System. And once again, that is directly from The Creature from Jekyll Island, and that's on page 209. But anyway, there were 3 financial families, the Rothschilds, the Morgans, and the Rockefellers, doing the actual bidding of the secret, or the Society of the Jesuits, okay? And again, this is, you've got to understand, I'm not indicting the entirety of a belief system here. It's certain hierarchy thereof. And that's the last time I'm going to say that. But these secret organizations do whatever is necessary to destroy the constitutional liberty here in America. The building of the Titanic began in 1909 in Belfast, the capital of Northern Ireland. Belfast, by the way, was a Protestant haven and was actually hated by the Jesuits. Now, World War I began just a few years later, but the Titanic was one of a fleet of ships owned by the White Star Line, which was an international shipping company. I'm just going to give you something here to think about. Once again, banking and investments, that was not the only business in which Morgan had a strong financial interest, using his control over the nation's infrastructure, including the railroads, as financial leverage. He created this international shipping trust that included Germany's two largest lines, plus one of the two in England, the White Star Lines. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We all know that there were very wealthy and powerful men at the time that stood up against the creation of the Federal Reserve, that were fighting the creation of the Federal Reserve. And isn't it interesting that these three men who were fighting the creation of the Federal Reserve found invitations by Morgan and others, or by Morgan specifically, and as well as others, members of their families, on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. The very people that stood in the way of the creation of the Federal Reserve and stood in the way of American involvement in World War I got gold leaf invitations to sail on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. Boy, 5 years ago, I was convinced that 9/11 happened exactly the way the government said it happened. Now, maybe longer than that. I don't know. Now I'm questioning what happened about the Titanic. Well, there were a number of very rich and powerful men who made it very clear that they were not in favor of the Fed. They were not in favor of World War I. And they were going to do everything that they could to block the establishment of both the Fed and our involvement in World War I. The Titanic, as it turned out, was the vehicle in which they met their watery death. It was the tomb in which they were buried. The specific people I'm talking about, the richest and most important of these, were Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, the head of the Macy's department stores, John Jacob Astor, perhaps the wealthiest man in the world. Now, their total wealth at the time, using dollar values of their day, was more than $500 million. Today, they would be worth nearly $11 billion. These three men were coaxed and encouraged aboard the floating palace of luxury. They had to be killed because at the core, the Jesuits knew that they would use their wealth and influence to oppose everything that this Illuminati machine stood for, was being planned. You might think, well, man, the ship hit an iceberg. What are you telling me? Well, here's the situation. Edward Smith was the captain of the Titanic, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I'm going to just a couple of minutes and then move on after the top of the hour break. But Edward Smith was the captain of the Titanic. He had 26 years of experience under his belt traveling the very waters in which the Titanic sank. He was the most experienced of all of the White Star Line captains. Think about that. But he was a member of the Jesuits. In fact, he held a title, Jesuit Tempore Co. You know what? I don't even know what. I can't even read that word. It's cut off on my paper. But anyway, he held that's right. He held a position within the Jesuit order. Now, Jesuits aren't necessarily priests. Those who are not priests serve the order through their profession, and anyone at the time could be a Jesuit, and their identity would not be known. But Edward Smith, the captain of the Titanic, served that order in his profession as a sea captain. Now, a few years ago, more than that, I think back in the mid-'80s, there was a videotape, a documentary is what I was looking for, was made about the Titanic. It was called The Secrets of the Titanic. when the Titanic departed from South England back on April 10th, 1912, Francis Brown, the Jesuit master of Edward Smith, the man that Smith considered to be a god to him, and a small g, he boarded the Titanic. He was the most powerful Jesuit in all of Ireland, and he answered directly to the Jesuit order in Rome. Now, this I'm talking about Francis Brown. This vacationing priest, Father Francis Brown, took a number of photographs of the passengers and of Edward Smith and so on. Got off the ship and sent it on its way. Edward Smith, if you look at the, I would say, evidence, even anecdotal evidence, he seemed to have been given orders from Brown, ultimately from J.P. Morgan, who owned the White Star Line and the Titanic, to take the men on board and to get rid of them, for they stood in the way of the ultimate objective of creating this Federal Reserve. They had the money, the power, the influence to do it. Well, Edward Smith was given an order to sink the Titanic, and that's exactly what he did. There's really, one would say, well, isn't there, I mean, me as an investigator, I would think, well, isn't there an easier way to get rid of these people? Like, 3 people? Why do you have to kill? Why would you even think? There were 2,227 passengers and crew aboard the Titanic. Out of that, 705, only 705 survived. 1,522 were drowned at sea, were lost at sea. Why would you even consider taking out that number of people just to go after 3? Well, there are answers. There's a lot of discussion about how in this Masonic and Jesuit and Illuminati world that innocent people could be very well regarded as collateral damage, but even more so, you've got to look at this as a game between the powers, with the powers, a game. As much as it sounds insensitive and crazy, it's a game, because we're dealing with psychopaths, we're dealing with sociopaths, we're dealing with people who have no regard for human life, but yet wanted to send a message and make it look like a total accident, that it couldn't be anything except what it was. But then you've got some anomalies here. The Titanic's last moments, the last hours, the Titanic, Edward Smith was taking the Titanic through an 80-acre ice field. He's traveled this before, 26 years before. 80-acre ice field at basically full speed ahead, 22 knots, traveling at 22 knots. Couldn't see a thing. The last hours show that there were at least 7 notices of icebergs out in his area. The water was still, it was a moonless night. One would have to ask, and legitimately so, what would an experienced sea captain, knowing of the dangers of the ice flow in that area, why would he pilot his ship full speed ahead in the most dangerous waters, under the most dangerous conditions that could ever be, even though he had 26 stellar years of experience under his belt? And he ignored warnings of icebergs no less than 7 times. And he knew, by the way, that there was a danger, and he knew that there were not enough lifeboats on the Titanic. Edward Smith never listened or heeded the warnings. To consider that he did so unintentionally does strain credulity, in my view. When it came to give the order to lower the lifeboats, Smith wavered on one of his aides had approached him for the order to be given. Smith kind of waited. His leadership skills at that time seemed to be out of place. He seemed to be out of place, even with 26 years of experience. There were threats that he had reportedly threatened to shoot men who got into the lifeboats, and the first lifeboat just happened to be lifeboat number 7, had a capacity of 65 people, only had 28 people on board. After hitting the iceberg, there was a 37-minute period before the first lifeboat went into the water. And interesting, it's lifeboat number 7, but even beyond that, what I found really interesting is the fact that it only took this massive, and I mean massive ship, 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. Folks, the unsinkable Titanic. 37 seconds between collision and even an acknowledgement of a collision took place. Many passengers came out on the deck just out of curiosity and played with the chunks of ice that were spilled onto the deck. But focus on this. 2 hours and 40 minutes for this huge, the biggest ship in the world, luxury liner, to sink. Now let me posit something to you that you may or may not have heard before. Is it possible, given the short amount of time that it took for the Titanic to sink, is it possible that that Titanic might have had damage, a pre-existing damage to it? Remember, and you can look this up in various books, but remember, White Star Lines under J.P. Morgan, they were kind of losing money. And one of the things, and I'm going to close this hour out with this, one of the issues here was the sister ship of the Titanic was the Olympic. Exactly the same. The Olympic, the month before, or before the Titanic set sail, in fact, it was in September 1911, the Olympic was taken out, piloted, or at the helm was none other than Edward John Smith, the man who piloted or was at the helm of the Titanic when he went down. Edward John Smith was also at the helm of the Olympic on September 20th, 1911. I'm sorry, it was a year before the Titanic sank. Traveling at 19 knots, there was a collision between the Olympic, again, the identical sister ship, same White Star Lines, with the HMS Hawk. And there was this extensive damage on the hull, 26 feet in front or behind the bow, below the waterline. It was not visible, but the Olympic was badly damaged. The bottom line with all of this is J.P. Morgan was faced with this issue. And think of Larry Silverstein in the World Trade Center. Just think of it by comparison. The J.P. Morgan had to get, they already had the tickets out for the most elite of the elite for the Titanic, and had to set the Titanic sail so they could accomplish what they needed to accomplish, and the objective there was to take out the opposition to both the First World War as well as the Federal Reserve. Yet the Titanic was not really ready. So in dry dock, in the months preceding, the weeks preceding the Titanic's maiden voyage, in Belfast sat the Titanic and the Olympic next to one another. And if you research this, there are suggestions that the two ships were switched, that it was not the Titanic that sank, but it was the previously damaged and ill-repaired Olympic that was actually sailing under the banner of the Titanic. Now, why is this important? Because there's a matter of insurance. You see, they needed to get the ship out, that is the Titanic. The Olympic was already damaged. To fix it would be incredible. There was a coal strike on. I could go on. But at the end of the day, there was a substitution, or I'll suggest that there was potentially a substitution. And you can read about this. This story is peppered with misinformation and disinformation. There's mummies involved in these other alternative explanations. Just forget about that. Just think about the possibility of the substitution taking place. The Olympic actually sailing under the banner of the Titanic with the key people aboard and with Captain Edward John Smith at the helm, with one mission and one mission alone, and that's to take the Titanic down. So he goes full throttle in the darkest night ever into a sea of icebergs, smacks an iceberg. It only takes 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink, when a ship of that size, even given the damage from the iceberg alone, it would take much longer. It was suggested by various investigations that followed. And there was a question, how did it sink so quickly? Well, if it was already damaged on the starboard side, and the damage took place elsewhere, or exacerbated the pre-existing damage, all the better. Plus, J.P. Morgan, White Star Lines, could possibly get, if this theory is accurate, they would also have the benefit of collecting the insurance money and being whole again. And everyone is happy. Well, not everyone. I would say the families, and I would say the 2,227 passengers and crew, as well as their families, would be the exception to that. But the people behind the Federal Reserve and those behind World War I were happy, not only because of the taking out of the individuals in opposition to their objectives, but there was a profit made. And in the end, aren't we supposed to be following the money? Don't we, as investigators and as people that are plugged in, isn't it following the money? Isn't that what it's all about? Even today, look at 9/11. Follow the money. It's almost like there's nothing new under the sun. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Report. Back with hour number 2. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of what's happening today. I want to thank you for joining us. Stay with us. We'll be right back. One of the best companies, I believe, for long-term food storage as well as survival equipment out there that you can possibly tap into. Folks, it's getting late. And when I say it's getting late, you're going to hear tomorrow financially how late it is getting. And then on Friday with Nathan Leal, even more how far into this plan, this satanic plan that we're into. American Survival Wholesale wants you to be as prepared as possible. I'm not going to read from any script right now about American Survival Wholesale. I just want you to go to AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, click on the store tab, do some shopping. There is the October Hagmann special there with the food, water, and stove. There is the Brother Marcus Christian Ninja Toolbox available. But here's the thing. Take inventory as soon as you can of what you need, of how far, of really what you need. And make a list. And even if you have to, write the owners, chance, Joan, write them an email. Their email address is right on their website at AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. Write them an email saying, hey, I need help figuring this out. I've got a family of 4. Whatever you need, they will open their arms to you and help you. They're that great. Believe me, they care that much. But, folks, it is getting late. We need to get prepared. So go to AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. Start now, even if it's with 1 can of food or 10 cans. It doesn't matter. Just start, because the time is short. We don't know. We don't know if this week we'll end our programming next week. We don't know if the bottom's going to fall out in 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. We don't know how much time we have. Let's do what we can while we can. So contact our friends at AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com. Let's get prepared.
If you're stumped, you don't know what kind of gift to give to a friend or a loved one, I'm telling you, you must go to 4physics.com. That's the numeral 4, PHYSICS.com. This is your one-stop shopping palace. That's the only way I can put it. I could spend easily an hour on this website. Innovative, fun, educational. There are games, books, weather instruments, unique time-telling devices, jewelry, optical devices, laboratory equipment. Let me give you an example. We all know we can tell time. With a sundial, you've seen those advertised. Did you know that you could tell time by the stars? At 4physics.com, you can buy a horologium nocturnum. This was a navigational device used in the 15th century by navigators at night to tell time by the stars. It's beautifully crafted in the shape of a pendant made of bronze and pewter or gold and silver. Absolutely a stunning gift. I would be proud to give it to anyone. You must go to 4physics.com. Even if you're not stumped, that's 4physics. That's the numeral 4, PHYSICS.com. It's your one-stop shopping palace. Any problems that you have, I don't know what to get Grandpa, I don't know what to get my loved one, that's unique, you will find it at 4physics.com. Please take my word for it. Go to the website, but give yourself a lot of time because you're not going to want to leave. 4physics.
And welcome back to hour number 2 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. I'm Doug Hagmann, flying solo just for one more night, I believe. And once again, thank you, everyone who has prayed for Joe's wife. She made it through surgery fine today. She's was in there longer than expected, actually, but came out of it with flying colors. Well, if you ask her, not so much, but nonetheless, we're glad that she's about ready to be released, hopefully pretty soon, and hopefully this will end her. And she's been having a lot of problems with a lot of pain and such. So hopefully this will take care of that. And Joe wanted me to express to all the listeners thanks for the email messages, the prayers, the messages altogether. Thank you so much on behalf of Joe, and also that he'll be getting back, or he'll try to get to everyone that's sent a note to him, and we really appreciate that. We are an extended family, and by the way, we are praying for a number of you folks out there. Y'all have, believe me, everyone has got some issue, and I know everyone's got some issue that they're fighting and we're dealing with, and we're praying for you as well. But we do consider you an extended family. And I mean it when I say that. We believe that we've got the most compassionate and intelligent radio audiences out there. I want to correct one statement I made, and thank you, WR. That was an 80,000-acre ice field, not an 80-acre ice. That was 80,000-acre ice field. When I talked about the Titanic. And I also want to correct something I said yesterday, too, just for the record and on the record. When I talked about Hillary Clinton Barack Hussein Obama and Hillary Clinton disappearing for that period of time in Chantilly, Virginia, I think I made reference to CFR or the Trilateral Commission meeting being held there. No. It was the Bilderberg Group. And pretty precise. So people, you get so much information and things get a little bit convoluted. I just want to make sure that I correct the record in the event someone catches that and says, wait a minute, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And sometimes I don't. But emails are coming in fast and furious as well right now. I'm not going to give out this person's name, but about the Titanic, I'll just say this. This individual knows personally a number of people who worked on the Titanic, the movie, not the ship. And Mr. Cameron is regarded as a very well-known but very disgraceful part of this New World Order machine. I'm not going to get into that. Let's see here. Okay. Let's just say that we're pretty much right on target in saying that, perhaps Mr. Cameron might be part and parcel to whatever deception might be coming. And I say that once again to encourage and generate intellectual discussion. It's not an accusation. It's an observation from previous behavior and throwing it out there for that purpose. And Barb, thank you, and Brandy and Mary, Kim, Leslie, oh my goodness, thank you very much. Annette, God bless you. Billy, Elizabeth, and I could go on. But what we're dealing with right now, where we find ourselves, I came across perhaps the single most important sentence ever uttered by J. Edgar Hoover. And he writes this, or stated this: the individual, meaning us, you and me, we are so handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so big, so monstrous, that we don't even believe it exists. We cannot believe it exists. The exact quote is, the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. And that's exactly our position right now. One of the reasons I mentioned the Titanic is try going to, when you go out to dinner the next time with your neighbors or your friends or your relatives, try telling that story to them. You think that they think you're a little bit off right now? Yeah, I'd say. But what we're seeing right now is the culminate or the overtime, the working overdrive of the Illuminati. And we all know the Illuminati as an occult, a secret society. They control the ruling establishment of Europe, of America, and really all of the free world. They're made up of powerful international bankers, Freemasons who control the world's politics, finances, media. Their goal is to incrementally tighten their control over the rest of humanity's mental, spiritual, and physical existence. So to leave us in an enslavement camp, a prison planet. Alex+Jones had it right in naming his website Prison Planet, because that's exactly what it is. The Illuminati, they've subverted very powerful and seemingly benevolent organizations, and just about every political movement on the planet, particularly Zionism, and this is where this false anti-Semitism comes from. Communism, even Nazism, socialism, liberalism, I mean, you name it, neoconservatism. They've infiltrated every major religious organization at the highest levels. And see, by owning the leaders on both sides and by owning the media, we once had, just a dozen years ago, 50-some separate media corporations? Now we're down to 5 that own all of the media. Well, the Illuminati, they own leaders on both sides of every conflict. They finance both sides of every conflict. They start all major wars. They determine the outcome. They're responsible for revolutions, depressions, and dare I say this, more recently, based on my investigation, 9/11 and the war on terror. The war on terror right now was the pretext for more war and a police state. And where do we find ourselves right now? This shadow government operating in America, we are now in a police state environment. Make what you will about it. Go to the airport and go ahead and subjugate yourself to the groping and the prodding and the violation of your private, personal person. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take part in that. And I would recommend, and in fact I advocate, endorse, and ask each of you listening to this, if we all stick together and say no to the TSA. I look at the TSA right now, in my view, and I've said this over the last year, the TSA is the most vulnerable government agency in America. If we say no, you're not going to touch me, you're not going to nuke me, but if we stand together in doing it, they will back down. There's precedent for it. They backed down now almost 2 years ago, Thanksgiving time. They shut down their X-ray machines or their nuking machines, and they stopped doing the pat-downs. Why? Because, and I believe Alex+Jones might have been the architect of this movement, but it was this opt-out initiative, and we were right behind it. Maybe it was last year. I don't know. It was around Thanksgiving time. But I'm all for that. We need to say no. Now, the central, of extreme importance, and we're going to be getting into this tomorrow night with V and Steve, the central banking cartel. They script both history and culture according to this long-term plan that was laid out. We went over this, the Pike, the letter, Mazzini, about the 3 world wars. The cartel members are generational Satanists. They worship Lucifer. They worship Satan. Don't forget Rules for Radicals. That was dedicated to Satan. A lot of people still don't know that. The book written by Saul Alinsky, the playbook of the progressives, the playbook by Barack Hussein Obama, by Rahm Emanuel of Chicago now, by Cass Sunstein, by Valerie Jarrett, by all these people in the White House. The book that they turn to the most for the playbook, their playbook, is Rules for Radicals, and of course the book that is dedicated to Satan, or to Lucifer. I mean, think about that, folks. Enough said there. The Illuminati has, and think about this too, how we are tricked by words. The Illuminati promotes democracy. Folks, it's not democracy. It's a representative republic. But they intentionally use the word democracy. You'll hear it creeping into the media. You'll hear it, you'll read it in newspapers. It's in reference to the United States of America. This is an intentional method to change our way of thinking. And in fact, in schools now, and this is attached to the Common Core, the social studies now, we're referred to as a democracy. We are no such thing. We are a representative republic, and there is a huge difference between the two. Most of the world leaders today are members of this international cult. These leaders are kept in line through blackmail. They're made to take part in occult rituals that include human sacrifices. And if you think that that's an outrageous statement, just look at the facts surrounding Bohemian Grove. Look at the ceremonies that take place there. Now, I'm not saying that actual human sacrifices take place at the Bohemian Grove. This is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there is in their worship of their god and their representation, their idol, the owl, the great owl representing Moloch. But they're recreating these human sacrifices. So if they're recreating these human sacrifices in private like that, don't you think that there is some level of occult activity that involves human sacrifice? And could that human sacrifice not, don't think of an altar necessarily with a victim in some sort of a group of people chanting to Satan, but human sacrifices could take in many forms. Could one of those forms be the wholesale killing of people, such as we saw, we'll say, on 9/11, or other types of events? Again, I ask you to think outside of the box. Don't forget the term Illuminati. It means the enlightened ones. It refers to Mariah, the conquering wind, and we had talked about this. You can go back and listen to this, but it's important to really comprehend the evil nature behind this. And of course, they're pushing this universal morality, their universal morality. They believe, by the way, the Illuminati, the satanic, these people believe that the Messiah will come when people either become righteous or become totally corrupt. So they have knowing human nature. They've opted for the most Caligula-like environment. Hey, since we can't all be saints, let's all be sinners. The Illuminati tyranny is invisible to all of us. It's not readily apparent to all of us until we are able to recognize it. Once we recognize it, identify it, whether it's through the media, through their numerology symbolism, once we identify the patterns, and there is a pattern to things, they put this emphasis on numbers, this numerology. Once we call them out on this, then we can, just like Benghazi in Syria, then we can make a difference. But again, we've got to understand what we're seeing. And most people today walk around, heck, they don't even know where they can't even find Texas on a map. And they might be from Oklahoma. But that said, we're dealing with a population that is extremely, extremely dumbed down because of the Common Core, because of Agenda 21, because of the very Illuminati agenda that they've instituted in our schools. And don't forget, of recent time, the National Education Association. They're a purveyor of perversity of the scholastic agenda. This is something that's right out of the textbooks of the Communist Manifesto to infiltrate the schools and to change the curriculum. This is what they're doing. So, folks, I would urge everyone with children today to pay very close attention to the books that your children are bringing home, because and also pay very close attention to the school district people, the teachers on your local level, because you can make a difference. If we are going to make a difference, it's just not on the big things. We can't fashion ourselves in a mental state to think that we can actually stop the next terrorist attack. But we can make a difference by the more mundane things. That includes your children, what they're being taught, and to say, no, you're not going to teach my child this, or no, you're not going to put my child through this, or no, I'm not going to stand for Common Core to be taught to my child. Whatever we need to do, we have to really hit them hard on the local level. This agenda is vulnerable on the local level especially. Now, we had already gone through the foundations of the Illuminati, and going back into how the Masons were drawn, how the Mason, and of course we had talked about the satanic bloodlines, the 13 families. We had talked a little bit about, we talked about the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the, what gave birth to the Illuminati, the communism, the New World Order, and we have done a lot of background. I'll say this, though. I don't think we touched on this much. People talk about the international banking cartel, and I was on Israel National Radio not too long ago talking with just a great friend, Tamar Yona. And when I mentioned international banking cartel, boy, she right away said, "Look, I know you're not anti-Semitic, but I got to get this out. You're not talking about the Jews now here, are you?" And I said, "Of course not." And she said, "Boy, a lot of people, there's this growing anti-Semitism. People, just because some people think that the international banking cartel is a Jewish conspiracy, but in reality, the reality is that the international central banking cartel is the only group with both the motive and the means to take over the world, whether or not there's Jewish elements to it, Vatican elements to it. It doesn't matter. Their motive is to protect this fraud, private monopoly over government credit and money creation. They need to establish this one world government to ensure that no nation prints its own money, and they're doing it right now. So it's not a Jewish conspiracy. It's not a Zionist conspiracy. It's anything but that. That's like saying Hitler was involved in a great Christian conspiracy or Catholic conspiracy. No, of course not. That's not what we're dealing with. So to bring it up to current days, I had mentioned this yesterday as well. Carol Quigley wrote the book Tragedy and Hope. And I want to reinforce this. He was a Georgetown University professor and CFR establishment insider. He wrote Tragedy and Hope. I've got it here on my desk, 1,330 pages. And he was bragging in this book, or is bragging in this book, about the secret societies, about this control, this ultimate control, is nothing less to create this world system with this financial control in the hands of certain leaders, the elite, and bragging about it. Well, if you look at our former President William Jefferson Clinton in a speech, and I'm going to thank you, W, as well, reminded me that Clinton had stated that it was because Bill Clinton said that he owed his election, or he owed being elected, to Professor Carol Quigley. So we know the level of infiltration is so great. Folks, humanity is under attack. Christianity in particular. All the monotheistic religions are under attack right now, but global humanity is under attack. The Illuminati, banking elite, what they're doing is they've placed this tremendous importance on giving the population certain enemies and pitting one against the other. The grand Hegelian dialectic is what I would call it. What they're doing and what we're going to see take place with the money issue. All of the financial collapses, all of our financial issues that are taking place, the crises that we're facing, these are all orchestrated. These are all man-made orchestrated crises that follow the Hegelian dialectic on a larger scale. The Illuminati, these secret societies, this unseen shadow government, they're creating the crises. They've created the solution. And, of course, they're pitting people against each other. And their intent is to bring order out of this orchestrated chaos. Hence, when you hear about the order from chaos, now you know pretty much what's going on. Now you know why that's so important to them, because this is what they're going to do. They will they will put us in a position in the United States of America, especially, but all Western countries, but in particular in the United States, they will put us in a position of utter chaos and step in as the heroes. Step in as heroes with the solution. And the solution is further erosion of our civil liberties. And, of course, the money system has been destroyed. The currency has been destroyed. So we've got to actually replace the currency with a different currency. They're going to come in and make everything look like this huge accident and give us the solution. That's their goal, is to create economic, social chaos. They have created these false wars, of which, not the least of which, by the way, is the war on drugs, a failure. The biggest drug dealer is the United States government. The war on weapons, we saw what happened with Fast and Furious, one of the most egregious plans, plots, schemes. Yet no one has been held accountable for Fast and Furious. And the media has turned a blind eye to Fast and Furious. Why? Because they're part of it. They're on the same side. It's not because it's Republican and Democrat. It's not because of progressives and conservatives. It's bigger than that. They're part of it. They're part of this globalism. The media. They're bought off not by some progressive. They're bought off not by some conservative. They're bought off and they're under the control of the globalist elite, these satanic forces that we call the Illuminati. It's bigger. You've got to think bigger. You've got to get your head around the enormity of the lie. It's just like when I got that email from that 32nd degree Mason. With all due respect, the lie is different. As I was told, the lie is different at every level. 98% of Masons out there, they're involved in Masonry. They believe it's a benevolent organization. It's not until you get to the very top, then you realize the truth, that you've been lied to. But now you've got the keys. But see, Benghazi, IRS scandals, NSA scandals. I mean, think about this, folks. The NSA tapping journalists. They were the victims of this NSA scandal. And just for the record, I'm case number 70900 NSA. Why aren't they screaming bloody murder? Because they're part of it. They're the plan. They are involved in the planning of it as well. Folks, that's what we're into right now. That's how big that's how enormous this is. This is not just the United States. This is not just the West. This is the entire world. So when the United States falls, who is going to step in? And is the failure, the planned, orchestrated destruction of the United States at the hands of these satanic illuminists, the illuminated ones, are we not building the framework and architecture for the Antichrist? I submit we are. And was that, for example, does that explain the Founding Fathers? A question was given, well, if the Founding Fathers were bad, how could they give us a great Constitution with the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment? Well, of course, not all were bad. Again, it's a process. It's a process of I don't want to say elimination, but it's a process of numbers. It's demographics. They've got to take this a step at a time. They could not come in. Of course, our founders, having fled from England, come over to being over here in the United States, objecting to the oppression of England. They couldn't just rubber stamp a copy of what they just ran from. They'd have to make it the Constitution, so people would of course be free under this. And not all of the signers were Masonic, Illuminati, Satanists. No, of course not. No, there was good there. So you can't look at it in that way. Most Americans, they don't realize that our country, as I said, was founded by Freemasons. They drafted the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. We talked about this here in previous programs. The Freemasons provided Americans with still valid ideas, the civil liberties, the equal opportunity, no taxation without representation. There were enticements designed to win power, and you might have noticed that some of these promises are not being kept today. Many historians, in fact, most historians won't tell you that. But there was one historian who did reveal the truth. If you read the works, and I've had many emails asking where to find information on this, Bernard Fay. He was a Harvard-educated Frenchman. He was considered an anti-Mason because of a book that he wrote back in 1935, Revolution in Freemasonry, 1680 to 1800. And he was one of the very few first people to reveal the extent of Masonic participation in the U.S. and in the French Revolution, because that was part of it too. Now, he did state that back in the 1770s, the U.S. consisted of 13 colonies with different governments, religious affiliations, customs, and so on. Back then, there were intense rivalries, long-standing disagreements among different the colonies. In fact, a letter took 3 weeks to get from Massachusetts in the north, Georgia in the south. But anyway, great source of information. He wrote, Masonry alone undertook to lay the foundation for national unity in America because as a secret society it could spread throughout the colonies and work steadily and silently. In the background is what he's saying. It created a very limited but extremely prominent class of people, a feeling of American unity without which there would have been no United States. In other words, what he's saying is it was like this elite of the elite. And of course, as I mentioned before, much to the dismay of David, as I said, as it says in the beginning of the program, you can't handle the truth. Well, Benjamin Franklin was a Grand Master of a French lodge and raised millions of francs to finance Washington's army and established a chain of Masonic newspapers in all of the colonies. And I explained in the previous program what we found, or what was found with respect to Benjamin Franklin. Again, I'm not going to stay in the history of this, but one other important thing is there was a 2005 deathbed confession of a gentleman by the name of Samuel Churchill. You might find it under a title, The Mardi Gras Secrets. He stated that Illuminati agents poisoned and killed presidents, including William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor. They also poisoned James Buchanan back in 1857, but somehow he survived. But all three were obstructing the Illuminati Rothschild plans for the Civil War. That document also describes the Illuminati role in the murders of Abraham Lincoln and Senator Huey Long. Now we know, or at least he says that we know, we should know, that the Illuminati through their agents, killed Presidents Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy, and even perhaps Warren Harding. Samuel Churchill was a high-level member of the secret New Orleans Mardi Gras society called the Mystic Crew of Comus. And that society reorganized the Mardi Gras festivities back in 1857 and was a chapter of Skull and Bones. He said that the Illuminati ringleader was Caleb Cushing back at the time. And the Illuminati, as ringleader, he was a partner of William Russell, the opium smuggler, who founded the Yale Skull and Bones Society back in 1832. Why is this important? Well, if you think back to George W. Bush, member of the Skull and Bones. And in order to rise in society, at least in that ring, one had to participate in the killing of the king, rite of passage. And that would equate that to the Bohemian Grove activities. The Skull and Bones, or the Brotherhood of Death, is nothing more than a political assassination hit team against U.S. politicians who oppose the Rothschild plan of world domination, the blood elitist domination, and control of our economy. Notice my emphasis on economy, because that's where this is all leading right now. It's the economy. Don't forget, Huey Long, he was a populist, and folks, you might know this. He was a populist who opposed FDR. He was a governor of Louisiana, and then he became a state senator. He was not a Mason. He didn't work for the bankers. He did not, much unlike FDR, he was not one of these kumbaya guys. He was a genuine threat, posed a genuine threat to the Illuminati. Long was shot by an Illuminati member, Dr. Austin Weiss, Dr. Carl Austin Weiss, on September 8th, 1935. And Dr. Arthur Vidrine ensured Long did not recover. Both FDR and J. Edgar Hoover won their 33-degree rite of passage for their participation in the murder. Churchill said, when J. Edgar Hoover came down to New Orleans to act out his reign as King of Comus, he was involved in sexual revelry, of homosexuality, and cross-dressing with various elitist bloodline members of the Mystic Crew of Comus. I got to tell you something. This is what takes place even today. There is such a perversion. When I spoke to my DHS insider, what I didn't write, I referenced this. DHS is like a modern-day Caligula at the highest levels. Now, you can choose to believe that or blow that off as just nothing more than fanciful voices in my head. But doesn't it fit? Doesn't it fit what we're talking about? Agents of Skull and Bones with involvement with J. Edgar Hoover also murdered, it is believed, and I think that there's substantial information to support this, Lindbergh's son, to set an example that an isolation stand was not acceptable. You don't do this. Either go along or you're going to face the consequences. The United States is really a financial colony of the British bankers. You often hear us talk about the city within the city, that being London, that sacred mile in the city of London, which has its own autonomy. British bankers actually took over the United States during Roosevelt administration. That would be Teddy Roosevelt, by the way. When the Rothschild front, J.P. Morgan, controlled 25% the Crown refers to the Bank of England and their actual identities as the Crown refers to the Bank of England and their actual identities, stating that they're an official secret. Why would that be? Why all this secrecy? both communism and the New World Order are closely related and are actually working together. There's a synergy between the two. They are working against capitalism. They want to destroy capitalism because, of course, as we had gone over before, the communist planks destroying abolishing private property and so on and so forth. We're seeing this take place all across the board today. Communism is actually a front for the Illuminati, for their theft, their murder, the Red Terror. It's real, but it's financed. Look who it's financed by. It's financed by the same families. We can go back in time and connect all of the dots, but bring it close or bring it to today. You know, we're up against the top of the hour right now, but when I come back, I'm going to give you some information, more information that'll be extremely discomforting about World War II. Why? Because it set something in motion that is important today, and it has to do with how Hitler came to power, but it also has to do with how he was financed, who financed him, and we're seeing the same thing take place today. And unfortunately, it involves Prescott Bush, it involves the IG Farben Company, it involves the banking elite. We're just going to touch on that. And then, to close it out, we're going to talk about the DHS, evidence of the globalist economic strategy, and what FEMA, the UN, and NATO have planned for all of us. Concerned? You should be. Folks, you're listening to Doug Hagmann flying solo tonight. And I expect Joe back tomorrow, but flying solo tonight. Joe will be back with us tomorrow. And don't forget, folks, tomorrow, Steve Quayle and V, the guerrilla economist, going to be joining us. And then Friday, Nathan Leal. And Saturday, we're going to have 2 hours of the Yoda seminar, personal safety and security seminar. It's going to be a good week. I want to thank you for hanging with me. Thank you for joining me. We'll be right back. Stay with us. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour. How quickly time flies. To the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, Doug Hagmann flying solo. This, the 23rd day of October 2013, giving you the framework of what we're facing. And I'm going to go quickly through this hour. I did want to mention, this is important, one thing, I got a couple of emails wondering about the reference to the Chile and James Cameron. Yeah, it's well documented. Mr. Cameron, there was a lot of animus between actors and crew members working on the set of the Titanic with Cameron, and he is part of the New World Order machine, according to many of the people who know him, work with him, or at least that's what they allege. Now, it is documented where a disgruntled crew member reportedly spiked a batch of chili with LSD while on the set. Bill Paxton was quoted as saying, "I ate the chili, locked myself in my trailer, and spent a really weird night with myself," paraphrasing, of course. Crew members, after that, subsequently wore T-shirts that read T3, a reference to Terminator 3. The T-shirts read T3, not for me. Message sent, but wasn't received. And I want to thank those who have pointed that out, that it is documented. And I want to thank you, everyone who have sent emails in about tonight's program. Thank you so much for your kind words. George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, when we talk about the New World Order and about how, have you noticed, by the way, how quickly the NWO, the New World Order agenda, has taken off. One thing that bothered the heck out of me, George W. Bush, for all of his alleged patriotism and his caring and concern, compassionate conservatism and Christian faith, concern for the United States, one thing that concerned me with the nomination of Barack Hussein Obama and all of the non-existent documentation with respect to who in the world this man was, not a peep from George W. Bush or George Herbert Walker Bush, not one peep. Well, they've got family secrets of their own, and I know, ladies and gentlemen, that the majority of you know this, but very quickly, just to show you how the Illuminati works, both sides of the conflict, there have been rumors of a link between former First Family, the Bush dynasty, if you will, and the Nazi war machine. It's been around for decades. Now, the Guardian had published a pretty scathing expose. This was back several years ago now, that stated that George Bush's grandfather, the late U.S. Senator Prescott Bush, was a director and shareholder of companies that profited from their involvement with the financial backers of Nazi Germany. Imagine that. The Guardian actually obtained documentation from the National Archives that a firm of which Prescott Bush was a director was involved with the financial architecture of the Nazi Party. His business dealings that continued until his company's assets were seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act they led to more than 60 years later to a civil action for damages brought in Germany against the Bush family by two former laborers at Auschwitz, and added to the pre-election controversy back in 2004, if you recall that. One former U.S. Nazi war crimes prosecutor was arguing that the late senator's actions should have been grounds for prosecution for giving aid and comfort to the enemy. Prescott Bush, his behavior, and of course his associations, were incredible. There's nothing to suggest that Prescott Bush was sympathetic to the Nazi cause. It could have just been a money thing. Yet, does that get him off the hook? The documents reveal that the firm that Prescott Bush worked for, Brown Brothers Harriman, and we hear that, but what is that? Well, he acted as a U.S. base for the German industrialist Fritz Thyssen, who helped to finance Hitler in the 1930s before they split back in 1940. The Guardian had drummed up evidence and saw evidence that shows that Bush was the director of the New York-based Union Banking Corporation that represented the Thyssen's U.S. interest, and that Prescott Bush continued to work for the bank after the United States entered the war. He was also on the board of at least one of the companies that formed part of a multinational network of front companies to allow Thyssen to move assets around the world. And Thyssen owned the largest steel and coal company in Germany. And actually, they grew rich from Hitler's efforts to rearm between the two world wars. One of the pillars in Thyssen's international corporate web, UBC, worked exclusively for and was owned by a Thyssen-controlled bank in the Netherlands. But even more tantalizing are Bush's links to the Consolidated Steel Company, based in it was based on the German-Polish border. Now, during the war, the company made use of Nazi slave labor from the concentration camps, including Auschwitz. Now, Does this sound right? And of course, in and around that time, we have the Dulles brothers, heavily associated with, the predecessor to the CIA, and then in the CIA itself. So when you hear that clip about Kennedy wanting to shatter the CIA, the intelligence apparatus into pieces, that was directed really at the Dulles brothers, and of course that entire empire that they created of intelligence and their questionable associations with the enemy and with Nazism and the Nazi factors that took place, or the Nazi death camps. It's just incredible. Americans either don't know this or don't care. They think it's ancient history. Yet we had George W. Bush and all of his associates, CFR members of the Trilateral Commission, all of these secret societies. And in talking yesterday with my source, that meeting where Hillary Clinton took a back seat to Barack Obama in 2008, that meeting of the Bilderberger Group, that alone, is that not a violation of federal law? And if there's no prosecution for such a violation, has this country been taken over? I would stipulate that we have. That we are indeed a captured operation, and we've been a captured operation for some time. Folks, you can read, and I won't get further into it, but you can read about Bush and, of course, what his dealings were, World War II, and, of course, how that formulated, and, of course, the Dulles brothers. I would highly recommend, certainly I'd highly recommend understanding exactly what happened then, so you understand, have a better understanding of how Bush became vice president under Ronald Reagan and what he brought with him up through today. But I want to get into something a little bit more prescient, I believe, in what we're facing right now. As we've often discussed on this program, right now the government has set in motion, has used technology to monitor every aspect of our lives. Our financial transactions, every purchase we make, every medical appointment we keep, our diagnoses, our travel, our internet searches, and more. Their actions far outweigh our ability to protect our privacy. And even in the face of growing public outcry over this loss of privacy, this government, the government of the United States and Canada, and we find now that Canada, if you read Judy McLeod's CFP article here, I think it was earlier today or yesterday, the same Canadian company that was behind the gun registry in Canada is behind the Obamacare exchange or website. Go figure. Well, the United States and Canada, the governments, we have no protection against government intrusion. If any branch of government, any intelligence agency, or any arm of law enforcement wants to watch what we're doing, wants to become involved in our private lives and our personal activities, they are free to do so, because there is really at this point no redress that we have, save for perhaps filing a RICO action on the civil side, hoping that we don't have a compromised judge or a threatened jury. But as we lose the very few remaining shreds of our own privacy, the United States government continues to create agencies and departments that intrude into our lives. A recent expansion of the shadow government, the Illuminati, the very agencies that we're talking about, the Council of 300. And by the way, I'm not going to have time to get into it, but certainly I received, thank you for sending from chat, thank you for sending me the Committee of 300 information on that. I'm not going to have time to get into that, but folks, if you want to really get an understanding of some of these objectives of the Council of 300, I suggest you take a look at what's out there. Well, you know what, I might get into this a little bit because this does provide exactly what's taking place today. But just let me continue on with FEMA, the UN, and this global governance agenda. Through FEMA, the shadow government, the government, the power behind the power, can suspend laws and our constitutional rights by ordering the displacement of entire entire populations of citizens for reasons of national security. FEMA can authorize the establishment of citizen detention camps where anyone accused of any crime, well, certain crimes, particularly those of political dissension, it can be held without trial for the duration of a national crisis, which we now know is forever. And people say, well, it's the neocons, it's the right, it's the left. No, it's this Illuminati, it's the structure behind this political paradigm, this fictitious political paradigm. FEMA can also arrest and hold prisoner any suspicious citizens without an arrest warrant. They could come right through the studio door right now and take me away because they don't like what I'm saying. And they could say, well, we suspect that you're actually attempting to sow civil discord, for example. Just remember this. FEMA was created back in 1979 through Executive Order 12148. That was under Carter. People look at Carter and say, what a doofus he was. Well, perhaps that might have been the case. But do you think it was Jimmy Carter himself and alone that created FEMA? No, of course not. The agency itself was designed to cooperate with the Department of Defense for future civil defense planning, specifically during national emergencies, but that has been expanded since then. This has given the sitting president, whoever that might be, the power to suspend the Constitution in a national crisis and to turn over the reins of government to FEMA itself. The president, and you got to understand this, the president can then appoint military commanders to control all state and local governments. Now, think about something here. Somebody sent me an email, and I apologize for not referencing you by name, but have you heard that the entirety of our congressional body is being flown to Florida for the funeral of one of the House members who passed away, senior House members who passed away? Boy, as soon as I read that, I thought of Extortion 17, SEAL Team 6, where they crammed all of these SEAL team members into one helicopter. Now, granted, I don't know for a fact the exact, if the entirety of Congress will be on a single aircraft or two aircraft, but it certainly makes me wonder, and it should make you wonder, could there be something else going on here? Has this been done before, where all of Congress is being ferried by plane, by aircraft, to a location in Florida? Doesn't that sound a little bit weird to you folks? But FEMA itself, in the absence of congressional oversight, what little of it there is, you're looking at a potential for tyranny like we've never seen in this country before. These potentially dictatorial executive powers, they increased massively with the passage of the 1991 and 1994 crime bills, which increased the president's power to suspend the rights guaranteed under the Constitution. Did you know that? Back in 1991 and 1994, the crime bills, when passed, they allowed the president just to suspend our rights guaranteed under the Constitution. They also authorized the government to seize property of anybody suspected of being drug dealers. I'm telling you that the war on drugs is a pretext for something larger. But if you're suspected of being a drug dealer, that means if you've got, we'll say, $10,000 on your person that you can't account for, you're automatically suspect, even though you've never touched a drug in your life, we'll say. But under that pretext, you could lose your property, meaning the money, you never get it back. There have been cases like that. FEMA itself has been enlarged through a series of executive orders signed by every president since Carter. So none of the presidents since Carter have clean hands on this. The Constitution, while it does not refer to the existence of presidential executive orders, these orders become federal law merely as a result of being published in the Federal Register. A lot of people don't get that. Kind of like Bill Clinton said, power of the pen, law of the land. Cool. It's unlikely that any of the signers of our Constitution ever contemplated such a thing. Remember, following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, George W. Bush created the Department of Homeland Security. In 2003, FEMA was made an agency of Department of Homeland Security. FEMA has spent only about 6% of its budget on emergencies arising from natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, and what have you. The vast majority of its annual funding within the last 10 years was used to construct secret underground government survival facilities. These hidden and protected structures are being used to assure the continuity of the federal government in the event of a major natural disaster or a nuclear, chemical, or biological attack, or perhaps a whole bunch of angry people, hungry and starving because this government has raped, pillaged, and plundered all of us. But just think about that. Only 6% of FEMA's budget has been used on emergencies arising, or for emergencies, set aside for emergencies, or used actually, as it was intended. 94% has gone to the construction of underground facilities for continuity of government operations. By presidents signing executive orders at the behest of the Illuminist secret society members, by the Kissingers, by the Brzezinskis, the Hillary and Bill Clintons, and all of these powers, you've got this overlap of societies, these fraternities and sororities and frat sororities, but mixtures of both. These power structures, these clubs with membership that is combined with high-level businessmen and women. And all of this has created this mixture, this toxic cauldron, smoldering cauldron of tyranny that we're facing today. Executive Order number 12656, you can look this up, declared that the National Security Council would be the principal body directing national emergency powers. FEMA's enormous powers can be turned on by the president at any time if he or she would perceive a domestic or foreign crisis. It's suggested that FEMA has 300 sophisticated mobile communication units equipped to assure continuity of government and ongoing operations during a national emergency. And each mobile unit can operate independently for up to a month. This is what we are paying for. This is what has been ordered by presidents, again, at the behest of these globalists behind the power structure. Here's where we're at right now. The president can issue executive orders without congressional oversight or approval. A sitting president can also create laws and regulations that may eliminate our constitutional freedoms completely. Let me just throw out some executive orders that I've jotted down here that over the last, 25 years have been signed into law by a president's written declaration. How about this one? Executive Order number 10990. That allows the government to seize all modes of transportation, control all highways and seaports. 10995. They can seize and control every portion of the communication media. 10997. It makes it possible for the government to seize all electrical power, natural gas, petroleum, and other fuels, plus all mineral resources, whether they are owned publicly or privately. 10998 allows the government to control food supplies, all food supplies, all resources, all public and private, including all farms and agricultural equipment. And of course, you've got the infamous 11000. And that permits the president to mobilize what could potentially include all American civilians into labor brigades under government supervision. That should send chills up your spine. 11002. The Postmaster General must create and operate a national citizen registry of every person in the country for possible assignment to government service during a national emergency. In other words, they could tap you on your shoulder and say, hey, you got to build that bridge over there, or work on that bridge. And perhaps Steve Quayle will get into this tomorrow about the post offices. But 11003 allows the government to take over all airports and all aircraft. 11004, Housing and Home Finance Administration. Actually, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. To relocate entire communities, build new housing with public funds, and designate areas to be abandoned as unsafe, and establish new location for populations. You can't live there? Got to move you. Invoking eminent domain. And 11005 allows the government to take over the railroads, inland waterways, storage facilities, public and private. 11921 allows Federal Emergency Preparedness Agency to develop plans to establish presidential control over the mechanisms of production and distribution of energy sources, wages, salaries, credit, and the flow of money in U.S. financial institutions in anything they deem as a national emergency. Remarkably, this executive order also provides that when a state of emergency is declared by the president, Congress can't review that action for 6 months. We're being held hostage. The army of the New World Order. You know, as our personal freedoms are being violated here at home, on the international stage, plans and policies continue to advance the cause of a one-world government. On the military front, NATO. Simple as that. They're rapidly becoming the armed forces for the coming global government. Following, of course, World War II, the U.S., the UK, and Canada supported the creation of NATO to prepare a united defense alliance. Well, that was against the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. NATO was founded as a defensive alliance, in fact, the most successful one in history. But we're seeing today this overreach by this tyrannical government It started in earnest with George Bush, and it is continuing even faster under Barack Hussein Obama. You know, people are looking for answers in everywhere but right in front of their faces. And how many times have we heard about these? How many more times do we have to hear about these? How many times do we have to tell our neighbors about these? Over the last few years, we've really grown weary of spending billions of dollars to provide the lion's share of military forces to protect Western Europe. You know, we're often called the world's policemen, and we're footing the bill for that. It's interesting, but let's just go on a little bit further here. NATO, the 26 member states of NATO, met in 1999. The purpose of that meeting was to negotiate the basis for expansion of the alliance into the new millennium. You remember that? The most serious issue involved the role of NATO military forces outside of Europe. Well, prior to Bosnia, Kosovo, for example, NATO had refused to become involved in military operations outside that very, very specific geographic region of its member states, but they've expanded. Now, that in and of itself should be of concern. The NATO Strategic Doctrine, the 1999 document, describes the strategic doctrine that's going to govern future military or political intervention by NATO. I'll just read a brief paragraph here from this. The security of the alliance remains subject to a wide variety of military and non-military risks. Now, these risks include uncertainty and instability in and around the Euro-Atlantic area and the possibility of regional crises at the periphery of the alliance. Some countries in and around the Euro-Atlantic area face serious economic, social, and political difficulties. Did you catch that? Serious economic, social, and political difficulties. And, of course, there's references to ethnic and religious rivalries, territorial disputes, and such. But what they're saying here is NATO could become involved in the event of an economic crisis. The nations of the Western Alliance believe that they've got a right to invade or intervene in any other nation because NATO's belief regarding the existence in that country of acts of terrorism, sabotage, and organized crime, they could possibly disrupt the flow of vital resources. So it is a national security threat. They could justify any action. They could declare further justification for military intervention. Even the attempt by a nation within NATO's declared security zone to simply acquire weapons of mass destruction, for example, or a nuclear weapon or chemical weapon, whatever. But throughout history, whenever an aggressive military alliance or power has arisen to threaten the sovereignty and integrity of neighbor states, the surrounding nations have formed their own military alliances. These developments could create the preconditions for the fulfillment of the revelation of prophecy in John's Book of Revelation about the rise of Antichrist, whose power initially will be based on 10 nations within the former territory of the Roman Empire. And ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, based on everything I've been able to research, and I've got papers I don't know, so many papers here, and I've read so many books, we're looking at this all wrong. I believe we're looking at where the Antichrist is going to arise, from where he will arise. I believe, personally, the Antichrist is already here. And I believe, based on my research, that not only is the Antichrist alive and well, that he's not going to come from the Catholic Church. He's not going to come from the Vatican, that is. He's not going to arise out of... He does not, although many people will argue that he's got to be Assyrian. The context is not necessarily correct. I would stipulate that if we were going to look anywhere for the Antichrist, we should look at a country, a power, that will be seen as a rescuing force. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, as I mentioned when I started, the vacuum ahead, that could be the title for this show. Who or what is going to fill the vacuum when the United States is taken, when our economy is destroyed, when we no longer are the world's reserve currency? And by the way, all of these normal everyday assessments that you hear people say, well, that can't happen. This is going to happen. It doesn't, with respect to economics. That what I would call the Dave Ramsey mindset. Now, I like Dave Ramsey to the extent that he gives good advice. You got to get out of debt. But everyone in this normal, everyone is thinking within the box. We've never been in the position that we are in today ever before. That is, America has never been in this position. So you cannot apply normal solutions to something that's abnormal, yet it is being done. And we're seeing it being done. So I would contend that the Antichrist is alive, walking the earth, in fact, in a position to fill the vacuum as the United States is crushed, or the demise of the United States economy is orchestrated by the globalists, by the satanic agenda. What we are going to see is that vacuum being filled by the power behind the Antichrist. And he will act as a savior for the starving people here in the United States and throughout the Western world. A lot of Christians are looking for the Antichrist to come, but he's already here. I think that's extremely important. I really would suggest that everyone would pray on that. Think about it, research it. But I do believe that we're seeing the run-up to the Antichrist as we see the spells being cast. Think of last year's Super Bowl. What was that? That was a gigantic display of the Luciferian agenda at work. The opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics, what was that? That was, they were casting spells. A cult. We're talking about the demonic elements here, demonic occultish elements, and I know that that's hard for, look, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around. So I can imagine, not that I'm any better than anyone else, because, far from it. But I mean, it's difficult for me to wrap my brain around, to think about. So I mean, I can imagine if you haven't been looking at this for like 24/7 over the last last year, to hear it, it sounds crazy. But there will be order out of chaos. We've been told that. That's going to be where the Antichrist is going to come from. It's going to be that order that is restored that we ask for, like Ed Kissinger had spoken about. And I quoted him yesterday. We're going to be begging for order. And that order is going to be restored by the Antichrist. Steve Quayle comes on and Pastor Langford and others talking about the fallen angels. What's that about? That's the initial bloodlines. That's the start. That's the starting point. In context, in the context of what we're talking about, that's where it all began. The fallen angels. And from there to here, it's the fallen angels. It's that it's that agenda. It's that bloodline. It's that numbers game. It's that corruption of the DNA. It's that corruption of everything good to the perversity of those fallen angels and beyond. And a good book that explains that, of course, is Angel Wars and Apollyon Rising and Zenith 2016. Several. Any book by Tom Horn, some books by Steve Quayle on that specific topic. But see, we're faced with the ultimate deception right now. We're looking at we've been deceived all along, and it's difficult, as we've been deceived all along, to tell when we're not being deceived. In fact, I submit right now that there's nothing but deception out there, especially within the mainstream media, and they're deceived as well. Some of them know the story and are going along with it. Others are deceived themselves. But our generation, you and I, the people right now, I shouldn't say our generation, you and I, we face the greatest crisis in history. Simply put, one road leads to eternal and unimaginable destruction, much like prophesied by Zechariah. And that could mean the end of civilization and, of course, the end of our eternal salvation if we don't turn ourselves over to God, our souls. One world is endangered by, we've got Islamic terrorism, the nationalism behind that. You've got this ethnic divisiveness. Rogue nations and terror groups are going to be they're going to be used at the hands of the Illuminati to use their devastating power of nuclear, chemical, and biological, and even electromagnetic weapons. These threats could lead to a very catastrophic situation that would exceed even the worst devastation caused during World War II. But another road leads toward the New World Order, a global totalitarian government that would seek to counteract that by extinguishing all human freedom. Remember the statement by I think it was British statesman Lord Acton, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Pretty simple, straightforward statement. The current trends right now are leading toward a single global governance, New World Order, in which all political, military, and religious power is going to be consolidated. That's where we're headed. Total control is going to be exercised by one supranational global institution led by one supreme leader, which is the Antichrist. Everything we've talked about the last 3 days has led to this point, and we're leading right now to the supreme leader, the Antichrist. The foundation, as I've gone through, has been laid. Even if the first few leaders of the New World Order, if there are any, are democratic in their intentions or benign or benevolent dictators, even if that doesn't make sense to me, but even if they are, there will be a leader of this New World Order who will rise to power through an evil agenda, but they don't have to appear evil. It's going to be the deception is they will deceive us by appearing that they are going to be our saviors, our savior. Daniel and John foretold thousands of years ago that an extremely powerful military, economic, and political power will arise in the last days. An extraordinary revival of the ancient Roman Empire This revived Roman Empire will use peace treaties and wars to ultimately encompass the nations of the world. And that, of course, people recognize that as the tribulation period. Remember, John declared that in the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of kings of the east might be prepared. That is out of Revelation 16, verse 12. The nations of the east will mobilize their forces with an army numbering 200 million men. That's out of Revelation 9:16. This unprecedented army will wage war against the Western nations under the military leadership of the Antichrist. Of course, we all know how it ends. The Antichrist will be defeated. So it's not a hopeless cause, but we need to be aware of what led to this point and where we are right now. Look, we talk about the mark of the beast. Look at this microchipping. Do you think Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is about health care? It's not. It's about control. And one of the controls, of course, is going to be with microchips. It's pretty easy to dehumanize someone by giving them a number, and it's pretty easy to sell it to the uninitiated or the uninformed or the misinformed as a matter of convenience. First, as we'll say, a national ID card, which is in the works right now, even by people you think are friends or allies in the war against the New World Order. No. It's going to start with a national ID card with microchips, and it's going to turn into the actual chipping. The Antichrist, totalitarian police, the control leading to Armageddon will involve the mark. Will involve the mark of the beast. We need to be very concerned about about what we see moving toward a centralized government, centralized world power, because it is only through the centralization. This is key. It is only through centralization that this can take place. If you are a student of prophecy, you know that this consolidation of power is just not merely the work of and I'll use the word again, benevolent or idealistic leaders who are just misled about the best way to prevent future world wars. No. The push for a one world government is a development that is the framework for global rule by the Antichrist. That's it. That's it, period. Please understand that. The economic warfare that is about to come upon us. We just briefly, we clapped, of course, and we applauded the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, the World Trade Organization. They're leading the nations of the world toward one world government right now. At least one world financial interdependence. The international trade agreements shifted control over the economic future of the U.S. and Canada to foreign officials. Organizations that do not share the same values we have or our love of free enterprise, we will be subjugated under these multinational or this one world trade agreement, one world economic system after the dollar is taken out. And just to be clear, as I had said before, they must kill the dollar. When the dollar collapses and your neighbor says, boy, it couldn't be helped because of, look at the alliance now with the Saudis, the oil, the dollar being tied to the oil, the free flow of energy to the West. That gets disrupted. Our dollar will fail, and it will be an intentional act. It's the killing of the dollar. That's going to be the tripwire here. And see, as chaos reigns supreme all across the United States, the globalists, the global elite, they're going to get their desire of population reduction. What do you think the ammunition, the MRAPs, the continuity of government underground chambers, of which, as I mentioned earlier, 94% of FEMA's expenditures have been spent on? What do you think they're doing this for? It's not for our protection. It's not to protect us from what's coming. It's to protect them from us. The chaos that is about to take place across the United States from this economic meltdown will be like nothing that has ever seen before. And we can look back in history, if there is a time when we can look back in history, we can look back at the Clinton administration. The people in power in Congress taking away the structures, the various rules and regulations by repealing the Glass-Steagall Act, by the implementation of, as I said before, GATT, by NAFTA, by the WTO. If you want to know who's behind this and who's responsible for this, those people and people like them and their associates are responsible for this. All of the Federal Reserve, of course, the central banks, the Bank of International Settlements on the larger global scale. You got the Geithners, Timothy Geithners. You've got the Volckers. All of these people, they're all in on it. It's a rigged game. And even now, every single person. Folks, if you don't think, by the way, that the police, look, I do believe, and I talk to a lot of good police officers, but if you don't think that the police, if there aren't enough people out there to be police to follow orders, what did we see when the open air monuments were shut down? Did you see the park police turn into brown shirts? Or at least their behavior was that of brown shirts? So does it give you the warm fuzzies to say, well, our police department, they're really good people. They'd never turn against us. Look at the park police. Look at their behavior against World War II veterans, against people who have stood up against the worst possible conditions in the world. Things that these RoboCops could never ever imagine. Yet these thugs, the park police, the brown shirts, got in the faces of the World War II vets. Now, folks, you tell me that that's not going to happen to your police department. It happened to the U.S. Park Police. But as we look around, we can see this coming to a head. And we can see this evil Illuminatist agenda. We can see the Luciferian element to this. Ladies and gentlemen, time is short. We're running out of time. But I can tell you this. We do know how the story ends. We can fight another day. We can do everything we can to buy us more time. We can occupy. We can fight against this New World Order. In fact, not only can we must. For the sake of ourselves, our families, our children, and our grandchildren. We would be derelict if we didn't. We will win in the end. It's just getting there that's going to be a bumpy ride. Folks, I want to thank you for joining me and putting up with me over the last 3 nights being solo. Joe will be back tomorrow, like I said. And, of course, with tomorrow's programming will be Steve Quayle and the Guerrilla Economist talking about where we're at and where things are headed. I want to thank you for your emails of support. Hopefully, this 3-part series is giving you a little bit more information. I know that you know a lot of it, but I got to tell you, a lot of people don't. A lot of people know it, but they don't know it. A lot of people need to hear it again. And some of you will point others to this program to listen to. And for that, I thank you. It's all getting the word out. It's all about getting the word out, being educated, and being in a position that when you're called upon to fight, and when I say fight, I'm talking about fight in the spirit and play your position, play your zone against the enemy that is. You have at least enough information where you can identify which team you're on and which team you need to fight against. I hope that made sense to you. But watch over the next several weeks. Watch, don't forget Syria. The agenda, the objectives have not changed with respect to Syria. Could it be that we'll see an escalation there in the short term? It's very possible. Of course, that would then result in a much quicker of our economy. Watch for the national grid exercises.